Hi, I'm Jim,
And I'm Kevin,
and we are.
the Signal Brothers. Hey, folks, welcome back to another podcast. We love doing these live. You know what we like better is we like having guests. We'd love to have you on as a guest on our podcast. So if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, would you let us know? We'd love to interview you, find out what you're passionate about, and get you on our the Signal Brothers podcast. Lastly, another thing we love doing is taking questions. Questions, we love to take questions, but the questions should be about the subject that we're talking about. So, Jim, I go over to you and let you introduce our topic for this evening.
Thank you, Kevin. This week, we're going to be talking about the First Amendment to the Constitution. The First Amendment is comprised of 5 different areas, and I'm sure you're familiar with most of them: the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the freedom of people to peacefully assemble, and lastly, to petition the government for redress of grievances. And they're all, the way I see it, these are all so interconnected is why they put them into one amendment. They all kind of bleed into each other. They all kind of feed off each other, and all are of equal importance. And I think it's very significant that they put this in the very first amendment. This is the first thing they thought of when they thought of our Bill of Rights.
Yeah. I'm glad we're doing this, Jim. Especially with a lot of things that have happened over the past few years, I think this is a great topic to talk about. And
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the first section of the First Amendment.
Yep. Freedom of
Awesome.
religion.
Freedom of religion. Interesting topic, especially today with freedom of religion, because it's also about not putting your religion on other people that don't want to be part of it. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
right, Jim?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, part of having your freedoms is having the responsibility to tolerate others' freedoms.
And also, it says, no national religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has the right to practice their religion as they see fit, and there's no standard for on a national level, right? So this is super important. This is super important to me, and it kind of conflicts. There's some clashing going on a lot of college campuses between freedom of speech and freedom of religion going on right now, especially with the Jewish community related to what's going on in the Middle East, and that's a whole nother subject. But there are people that are being denied from practicing their religion freely based on other people's freedom of speech. So I find it quite interesting that we're at a crossroads where that happens. What's your opinion on that, Jim?
Well, religion is probably, which is why it's listed first, is such a huge portion of so many people's lives. It is very touchy. It's very personal. It's very deep, and it's about who a person is. So it's always going to be a very sensitive subject. And again, it's mixed in with freedom of the press, freedom of speech, all that, because they all bleed into each other. Like you're talking about, they're clashing a little bit on college campuses, and that's a big thing right now. Anyway, is what's going on, what they're teaching, what they're doing on college campuses. And a lot of that also comes down to, is it a public college or is it a private college? Because if it's public, it's subsidized by the government, and that's where you have your clash. If it's a private school funded by private citizens, you don't have that protection clause.
Yeah, it's an interesting slippery slope, right? And where does I guess for me the tough part is where does your right to practice your religion and I guess some people would argue that my the statement I'm making about the clash doesn't make sense, right? They're not being denied for practicing. Jews are not being denied for practicing religion, but people are who are anti-Israel, right, are speaking against Israel and the Jewish state, not necessarily the religion. One could argue that they don't conflict. But I think if you're a Jew on some of these college campuses, I think that you would feel unsafe to freely practice your religion.
Yeah, Absolutely. Because the thing about freedoms is that people don't seem to realize is freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of whatever does not mean freedom of consequence. They get around that by simply saying, sure, practice your religion. But then they'll treat you a certain way on the back end, or you just happen to not qualify for this program, or, things, there's always a way around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a tough thing. I think largely in this country, most people are allowed to practice their religion without any consequences. I don't think it's a part of the First Amendment that is that's been widely challenged in recent times. I know there's people that have lots of opinions about lots of ideas about different religions, but I think it's one of the parts of the First Amendment that, aside from some of the issues that I had brought up, I try to think about some other things that, where somebody's religion is being inhibited, but I can't think of any, Jim. How about you?
Well, the two that come to my mind is one is the display of the 10 Commandments in a federal courtroom. I could see the conflict there. I could see the conflict. Is it a battle worth fighting? I don't think it's that big a deal. But there's one that comes to mind in the state of Tennessee where I live, is even with that clause of establishing no national religion, every now and then some Tennessee lawmaker decides to introduce a bill to make the state book of Tennessee the Bible. I'm like, why? That's not going to pass. All you got to do is pull up the First Amendment, and it's not going to pass. But they do it over and over again. Every few years they'll do it. Those are the two that come to my mind the most.
Yeah. Well, I think those are good points. Definitely the 10 Commandments being posted in government buildings is an interesting concept, right? Because of people should be free, and those that don't necessarily observe a religion, right, are being exposed to, right, a religious thought or a religious concept. So it's a great point. We ready to move on to freedom of speech, Jim?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Freedom of speech. This is one that I think we're going to probably spend some time on talking about today. Yeah, because there's been a lot of, and again, I'm not trying to single out a specific administration, but during the previous administration, there was the office of forget the office name, the one that was going to fact check all the stuff. And, I don't know. If you have freedom of speech, to me, means your speech is freely protected, even if it's false speech. I just think there's a fine line there, though, because if the false speech is about you have a right to sue people for defamation of character. But putting that aside, if I want to put out things that are untrue, that the earth is flat, if I want to argue with somebody the earth is flat, and people could argue that to the cows come home, but the bottom line is, if I want to believe that the earth is flat, I'm allowed to speak that, even though in my heart of hearts I know that's not true.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept, right? And they were trying to factually check what was being put on social media. And the problem with that is, once you start checking what's factual, there can be a perspective or a slant and a control of the information that's being released to the general public. Would you not agree?
That's absolutely right. My big thing is that comes to mind with this kind of thing is they come up with they coined the term hate speech. It's not a good thing to go around somebody and making fun of them and calling them out on something, make names and calling them whatever. But again, there we are trying to, govern their speech. Is hate speech a good thing now? But it falls under freedom of speech.
Yeah, this is an area I'm really conflicted, Jim, because I'm going to go back to the college campuses again, right? Jewish students walking across campus, being called some of the worst names, right? And the worst things being said to them. And while I agree about freedom of speech, and I don't want to restrict speech, I definitely think that that kind of behavior shouldn't be tolerated, right? I'm not trying to suppress people's speech. I'm not trying to tell them what to think, but I think you have to be respectful of other people's perspectives.
That's absolutely right. But the problem we have these days is that's disappeared. The respect for your peers, your contemporaries, your elders, your whatever. There's no such thing as respect. Well, you have to earn my respect. Well, you have to earn my respect too. And respect I get is not a thing easy given, but I mean, you've got to treat people. The golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I try not to treat anybody if something was going to hurt my feelings, I'm going to intentionally not do that to somebody else. And
Sure.
we don't have a whole lot of that. And if you were to get two people, take driving down the road, for instance, you're driving down the road and each vehicle's doing their own thing and they're yelling at each other and honking. But if these two people pulled over and walked up to each other, they'd be talking just like you and I are talking. It's the position that they're in. And when these guys get together with, like minds, say 10, 20, 30, 100 of them, they get emboldened, and things they would never say one-on-one to somebody, they now feel is okay to say. And, you think about how this has gone over the years. You think about, what were we doing during World War II? We were trying, we have, what did they said in the movie Inglourious Bastards? Is like, he's a Jew-hating somebody that we've got to put down. So, and then right after World War II, now all of a sudden we have prejudice against Jewish people in the United States. I'm like, how do we go from that to that? And we're back to it. And I believe a lot of the fault of that is going to be discussed in our next part of the First Amendment. So I'll save that for now. But I just don't understand. I think a lot of the way, I don't know if I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but the way people have been raised in the last 2 or 3 generations, the whole gentle parenting, the whole, timeout, the participation trophies, when I said something wrong to somebody when I was a kid, my mom would knock me across the room. So I didn't say that anymore. I mean, you're my age. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. But
I
now it's like,
know what you're talking about, Jim.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
do you realize where I'd be if my mom didn't knock me across the room at least once a week? I'd be in jail or dead.
I bet you my kids know a little something about that too. So, yeah, but freedom of speech. I think the big deal today is social media, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about the younger generations today, Jim, they live on social media, right? Mm-hmm. And everything and anything is available to the younger generation for anybody that's on social media, right? So I think the biggest thing is when you're on the internet and you see something, right? You got to validate is it real, right? Even with the AI generation today, I mean, I'm looking at videos of people being recorded saying things they never said because of AI generation, right?
Oh, it's just going to make it worse.
Yeah. So I think that's a concern. At the same token, right? This is my confliction about freedom of speech. I believe in the First Amendment, and somebody should be able to be free to say what they want to say, even if it's not true, if it's incorrect. And so I think we just got to raise people to make independent people. The younger generation's got to learn that just because you see something on the internet does not make it true. That was it when the internet was introduced, 30 years ago. That was the case. It's still the case today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the internet now is like the TV was in our generation. Our parents could walk away for half an hour and take a break because we were watching cartoons, or we were watching the Dukes of Hazzard or whatever the popular sitcom was of the day. The TV babysat us. They could walk away and take a break. That's the internet now. That's social media now. And if that's not checked, and they're getting all this information, and they hear something about somebody, say somebody's running for office or whatever, or a celebrity or something. Well, this guy's been in public view for the last 60 years. You're hearing about the last 2 or 3 years of their life. You don't know what they did before, whether it be good or bad. you don't know, you're not judging the whole person. You're judging them on one incident that you probably heard 10 times removed. And you're putting no effort into validating what you're hearing before you spread it again.
That's fair, Jim. And you brought up a good subject about something you might have said. And we got a comment. We'll get to that comment in a minute. I think I look at some of the things I said when I was in my 20s, and I look at some of the things I said when I was in my 30s, other things I said in my 40s, and my opinions have drastically changed. If you would have talked to Kevin, the 18-year-old Kevin, versus now, right? My opinion about certain things have drastically changed. Drastically. So not only is it right, I think it's good to take holistically at a person what they say across time, but I think you have to do that knowing that people's opinions change over time too. Mm-hmm. So we had Colin who brought up a comment. You have to draw the line with clear and present danger tests as established by Schneck versus the U.S. in 1919. I agree, Colin. That's a great point. Where does the line draw, right? And I think it comes back to what Jim said is about people know where that line is, right? And people choose to challenge that line. And I think, and I apologize, Colin, for missing your comment, because I think you were talking about back to the hate speech conversation we were having, and I wasn't paying attention to comments. My apologies. So, yeah, this is interesting. Where's the line draw? Where do you draw the line? Right? And who draws the line? I guess that's the question.
Mm-hmm. And it's pushing the envelope, pushing that line that actually causes us to progress in our thoughts too. So how much is too much pushing and how much is not enough and how much is, too much? If we stayed at that line, some of the lines that were drawn, in the 50s, 70s, 90s, we wouldn't be where we are today. But by the same token, we wouldn't be where we are today in some of the bad ways either.
Yeah. So, Colin, I was just looking at the court case you brought up. It's a great point about if it impacts or clear and present danger to national security, right? So that's a great test for national security. And with the topic we've been having, I'm not sure that it would necessarily be a challenge to the national security, but I think nonetheless a valid point.
Right. Because most people that we're talking about at this level aren't going to be in the position to threaten national security.
Yep.
So it's a good point, but yeah.
Yeah. Freedom of speech, and there, let's say this. I see a lot of people on social media expressing their freedom of speech in lots of positive ways, right? We're talking about the negative, but I see a lot of people doing good stuff on social media for freedom of speech, right? Some of the discussions that I see happen, the husband and wife routines about marriage, right? There's a lot of great stuff out there where I see people using speech. This one lady, I love watching on TikTok, Veronica, right? She's addressing customer service and dealing with managers in the workplace. I really enjoy watching Veronica. If you haven't watched Veronica on TikTok, I highly encourage you to check her out. There's a lady that's really taking freedom of speech and freedom of thought and taking it to the next level. She's a great example of doing it in a positive manner.
Well, that also goes into, and again, I couldn't find what year it was, but the Supreme Court ruling that freedom of speech also extended to freedom of expression, not just the spoken word, but sign in your yard, T-shirt you're wearing, bumper sticker on your truck, that kind of thing. It's indicative of the whole thing. So, if I feel a certain way, I love Dalmatians. I can get a bumper sticker and put it on my truck saying the same thing, and I'm perfectly free to do that. Falls under freedom of speech. I don't know why I just grabbed Dalmatians, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I've seen some interesting things on the back of people's cars, and they're expressing themselves, right? Whether I agree or disagree, they're expressing themselves the way they wanna believe. So
Yeah. And great point you brought up a little bit ago. How old is the person driving that car? And what's their
yeah,
opinion going to be like when they're our age?
yeah. It's interesting to bring that up because I just recently got my first tattoo a year ago, Jim. And you
Hmm.
know what? Even though I was a pretty ignorant young guy, one thing I knew in my 20s is I was afraid to put something permanently on my body, not knowing how the future Kevin was going to look at what I did, right?
Hmm.
So I waited till I was 58 years old to put a darn tattoo on my body, but nonetheless, uh, it goes in line with what we're talking about, how your opinions change over time, and you may express yourself a certain way when you're younger. When you're older, you may see it completely different.
Right. And that can work when you're talking about your politicians and you're talking about your people running for office and your celebrities and stuff. Well, you're this guy says this now, but look at this tape from 35 years ago, what he said. Well, he was a different person 35 years ago. He may
100%.
not hold that same value. Now, if he said it the entire time for 35 years, okay, I got you. But if he said it
Yes.
once and he come back
Yes.
later and he's talking about it differently later, he changed his mind.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, they'll use that on some people and they won't use it on others. Whatever happens to fit the current agenda, they'll use it that way. It's like that's just truth manipulation. But again, that goes into our next.
Well, let's go there. Let's go to freedom of the press, Jim. Let's talk about freedom of the press and why
Yeah,
this is so important, especially today.
we could do a whole episode on just freedom of the press.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you lead off on this one.
Freedom of the press. The first thing that comes to mind is we're about the same age. You remember back when we were kids, there were 3 TV channels. You
Yep.
had a half hour of news in the morning and a half hour of news in the evening. Counting commercials, that's about 21, 22 minutes. That's it. There's no time for opinions. There's no time for feelings. There's no time for commentary. You said this, and this, and we were left to do with it what we thought was right. That was great. That needs to come back. Once the cable and satellite companies got in and everybody started getting hundreds of channels, you are now seeing opinions of people from halfway across the country that you would never have otherwise have been exposed to. Now, that's a good thing. You see other viewpoints. Okay. But where I think it began long before social media was the advent of the 24-hour news channel. Now you've got like
CNN was
times,
number.
yeah, you
Yeah,
got
CNN
50
was the
times.
first 24-hour news channel.
Yeah, you got 50 times the airtime. Now you got time for opinions. Now we got time to gather people together in commentaries talking about how they feel about what they just presented, how you should feel what they just presented. Hey, how do you feel about it? This is what we should do about it. This is what we shouldn't do. We don't need, tell me the fact, and let's move on. And then it just goes on from there into social media. Now you got video. Everybody's walking around with a camera phone. But depending on who gets a hold of that video, let's cut out the first couple of minutes where we see what we don't want to see, and then everybody's seeing the part that you want them to see, so they get outraged. Manipulation of information. I mean, that's where I'm at with that. We've got an overabundance of information, too much time on our hands, and I mean, it's too much at once and too much to abuse.
So here's my take. I am good with the difference of perspectives out there. I'm okay.
Mhm.
I look at I don't just look at Fox News, right? As a registered, as somebody who considers himself a center Republican. I look at CNN. I look at ABC. I look at CBS. I look across the spectrum, right, for answers. And sometimes I even go to external, from the U.S. Channels. What I expect, though, is accurate and fair reporting.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed, and I'm not talking about only the liberal side, it's on the conservative side too, right? Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Is there's been some very, very slanted reporting that hasn't been done with the proper research. And they go to publish articles that have not been thoroughly researched. Because today, in the world we live in, everybody wants to be first to publish, right? They want to be the first to break the news, right? I think, and I don't run a news media organization, but to me, it would be important to be the first to report accurately, right? That would be a big deal to me, right? And there have been so many things on multiple instances over the past, I don't know, 6-7 years that have been so wrong at initial reporting because they want to be the first to get it out there on the street.
Yep. And
go ahead.
I say the differences of what you hear when you change channels. I'll use something we talked about a while ago. Is I used to work at a larger company several years ago, about 10 years ago, and we had a large lunchroom, break room, and there was all kind of stuff in there for everybody to do, but it was huge. And the thing that I remember most of all is in the two corners that weren't on the outside doors, you had a TV in each corner, CNN on one, Fox on the other. And on those odd times when they happened to be presenting the same story at the same time, you would hear such a different take on what happened. I was like, the truth is the truth, period. You have to intentionally manipulate it to get it to say something that it's not saying. And that's what we're seeing a lot of. And when you can see them side by side telling the same story in two different ways, you know you've got this going on.
Well, like I said, I'm good. And understand, we all have different perspective, different lenses on perspective of what goes on in life, right? And we could, probably a good thing to do would be to bring up some examples of this reporting, right? But let it be the truth. It can be the truth from your perspective, but you should clarify that it's not fact, right? It's not the fact, right? You should first say, this is the facts that we know. And then you can come by and say, based on the facts, my opinion of the situation is whatever whatever your opinion is, right? And I think that's what's missing, right? That is absolutely missing, Jim, in freedom of the press. Here's another issue I have with freedom of the press, right? With the way it's being restricted, right? And it's this White House has been pretty bold about it, right? Revoking press passes for certain personnel that don't agree with what they do. Well, guess what? That's too bad that you don't. You want them in there to report on at the White House press briefings, right? I'm not okay with them revoking those press passes. I'm just going to be straight up honest with that, right? That is part of freedom of the press. The press has a right to be there.
Yeah, but I mean, if they've been so adamant in presenting things wrong, you could understand why they wouldn't want them there. Yeah, as long as you still have some people from the other side there that do a decent job of it. Yeah, but I mean, again,
go ahead.
That goes right back to being responsible when exercising your rights.
So what I would say is, if there's a specific news organization that you're not particularly happy with the people that they're presenting there because they're presenting a false narrative, then go to that news organization and say, listen, this person we don't want in there. We're not revoking your access, but we don't want this person in there because we don't think they're presenting right. Put somebody else in the seat, right? That's going to present it correctly. But I think telling a specific news organization that they can't be in there to report the news, I disagree with that. And I know we can't have every single news organization. There's a limited number of seats in the White House press briefing room. There's a limited number of seats in all these places where they do press briefings. But if you're a major news outlet, you should not be kicked out, right? You shouldn't be restricted from presenting or being able to be there to ask questions and to get the information firsthand. That is part of the First Amendment, and I think this administration has to be very clear about that, right? That hey, I'm not okay with this person being here. Find somebody else, and we'll be happy to let them in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of that. Yeah. Okay. You don't like how this person's doing it. Okay. Let's get another person from that organization. I can work with you on that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the problem with the press is again, freedom of the press. We should have it. Some of the ways they go about doing things is just underhanded, and they don't care about who they hurt when they throw out a story just so they can be first. And I'll give you a very personal story. I won't mention names, but there was a relative of mine that was killed in active duty many years ago, 20 some years ago, and my aunt and uncle learned about his death on TV before the Army was able to come and see them within a day. That's irresponsible. That's dangerous. There's no excuse for that. And to me, I've seen many things over the years. I think, and I hate to say it, I think that freedom needs to be restrained a little, not taken away. If they can't do it responsibly themselves, they may need to be assisted in doing it responsibly. I don't have the answer, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. And it's that fine line, Jim, of, how do you determine what's responsible reporting and what's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, laying out the facts. Again, it comes down to laying out the facts, right? What are the facts? And then applying your opinions to those facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like you said, back before 24-hour news coverage, right, we used to get just the facts.
Yeah.
Right. And now we get lots of opinions.
Yeah,
right.
the sky is blue.
And the opinions
Yeah.
range from extreme one way to extreme the other. You got the center, and there's a lot of charts out there. I know a lot of people have seen them, like the media bias chart that's available out there on allsides.com. Probably a good one that gives you an idea of where certain media outlets lie as far as their reporting. But I would tell to any listener out there, right? Hey, don't just listen to the things you agree with. I forget what you're saying, Jim. What's the most valuable opinion?
The one that differs from your own.
Yeah. You got to listen to all sides, right? Got to listen to all sides. I think it's super important, extremely important. So freedom of the press. It is. And then what constitutes press today?
Oh,
right?
that's
An independent, right? That's kind of expanded with social media. A lot of people. I've watched a lot of videos on TikTok of people saying, "Hey, they're out in the street recording, and the police come up to them, or the store owner comes up to them and says, 'You can't record here,' right? Well, I'm a reporter. I'm reporting, right? And I wonder, right? There's a lot of independent reporters out there today. And during like the riots, there were a lot of independent reporters that became famous that were out there reporting during the riots that were going on, during a lot of the protests that turned into riots. Let's call it right. There was protesting that turned into riots. And I'm not saying that the people protesting were necessarily the ones that created the riots, but there was a lot of independent reporters out there that got famous, right, when they were out there reporting during these demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, like a moment ago, everybody's got a camera phone now, so anybody with a camera phone and a YouTube account can be the press now.
Yes.
Yeah, where do we draw the line on that? And I mean, yeah, you can do it, absolutely, but I mean, would you rather listen to Bob Smith, the 17-year-old, or would you rather listen to a certified news agency?
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
So I ponder this question, Jim. Does the Signal Brothers constitute a form of press?
The fact that we state on our little ticker on the bottom that we're expressing opinions.
Yep, that's a good point.
Yeah.
All righty, we're gonna move on to freedom to assemble.
Sure.
Because I think we already kind of crossed into there, but with the demonstrations that was going on, freedom to peacefully. Let's emphasize. Even though I haven't put it in there, it says to peacefully. It's even behind me. The word peaceably is behind me, to assemble. Right. That's a super important right that we have in this country. Right. To demonstrate, to assemble and protest against the government. Right. Super important.
Absolutely. The masses, the people need to be heard. And if you can do it in a peaceful fashion, that's a force to be reckoned with. Once you turn over to violence, that's the only thing they're thinking of is quell this thing down and let's get them. They're no longer thinking about your subject. You're just violent people. And we've had a ton of that in the last handful of years.
We've had a lot of that, and I will say this, Jim. I believe that a lot of those protests during the times of that over the past few years, there was a lot of emotions running high, and people were rightfully protesting. Right, the Black Lives Matter movement became big because they were peacefully protesting, and while a lot of those protests turned violent, I don't believe the people that were protesting were the root cause of the violence. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, there's a lot of ways to take what was done because there's a lot of instances. So is walking onto an interstate and blocking entire interstate traffic peaceful? Is burning down the entire neighborhood to include the 80-year-old man whose only source of income was that diner you just burnt down?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. So
I'll never forget watching video of stuff burning in the background and the reporter on the camera saying, "This is mostly peaceful." Are you kidding me?
Yeah. So, you bring up a good point. I want to dissect both of those separately. First of all, the people that protested and shut down highway traffic, while I certainly don't want to be prevented from getting home in the evening and having a traffic jam, I would argue that they were peacefully protesting. They weren't smashing people's car windows. They weren't doing anything. They were protesting peacefully.
Yeah, it was still disruptive.
Yeah, it was, but it was peaceful. As far as the fires, right, that goes back to my thing of saying that I think people were protesting peacefully. And when things got burned down, I think those were malicious people that were trying to turn it into something that it ought not be, right? And I'm not saying it was a party. I'm just saying there are people that, in general, that when there's an opportunity to create issues and create problems, we will. Doesn't matter what side of the issue you have, there will always be people that want to start problems that show up to those events and turn them ugly.
What about intentional? People intentionally showing up, bussing in people to disrupt a peaceful event on both sides. There's been accusations of that, and depending on, to a degree, proof of that. I'm not going to go into that because I don't have anything to back that up. But I mean, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. Yeah, they're doing a peaceful protest. This take a couple busloads of ex-convicts and throw them out there and see what havoc they can wreak. Perfectly reasonable. That's possible. And
it's possible. Yeah, it's possible, but I don't believe that's the case. I just believe there are people that want things, no matter who's protesting, right? Peacefully. I think there are people that want it to turn ugly because they have a hidden agenda of dividing this country, right? I think the greatest freedom we have in this country, right, is the First Amendment. That's what we're talking about today, and the right to assemble. But there are people that have agendas, Jim, out there that want them to turn it ugly, right? Because they want, right? They don't want people to be able to be peacefully demonstrate, right? And what they do is they take that opportunity to change and be malicious. And to me, it goes back to everything we're talking about, the reasonable person, right? The reasonable person. And there are cameras everywhere today. So I think people are really taking advantage of that, Jim.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't completely peaceful demonstrations. I know there are. You see them all the time. It's that one in 100, 1 in 1,000, whatever it is, that ends up turning violent and out of control. Plenty of examples of peaceful demonstrations that we see all the time. And they should absolutely, have the right to do that. At the point where you have to call in riot police, you've lost control of that. And I like the fact that the one thing that that stands out in my mind also about BLM blocking the interstates is the police came out and they brought them coffee. Remember that?
Like I said, I believe that is freedom to assemble peacefully, whether it disrupts or not. I'm going to stand on that, right? I'm going to stand on that ground, Jim, on that for me. Right?
Yeah.
They were trying to send a message, and the way they were trying to send the message, they were trying to bring attention to the issue, right? And
they could have done it anywhere.
Yeah, by shutting down traffic, you are definitely bringing your message loud and clear. What I like to do is swing to January 6th, because that was freedom to assemble peacefully until they stormed the building.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It was freedom to assemble and freedom to speak your mind. But once people decided to go cross the line, and I know there's all kinds of, theories about that and everything, but guess what? I know that I just can't walk into the Capitol building without going through metal detectors, and there's a line, there's a way to get in there, and I think that was a freedom to assemble, regardless of what caused it to go where it went. It crossed the line when they decided to storm the building.
Well, we may disagree on a lot of points of that, but it did end up crossing the line.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'm thankful for the right that we get freedom to assemble, freedom to protest. I'm thankful that we have those rights in this country, right? And I think in the past few years, we've seen a lot of positive, right? While there have been some crazy things that have happened, I think there's been a lot of good things that have come out of peaceful demonstrations, right? Let's talk about the Black Lives Matter, right? Because it became a fabric and a consciousness of this country to pay attention to that. And I got to be honest with you, my opinion is I don't think we really paid attention to it until it became a subject and people started protesting.
Yeah, it's too bad what they found out about the leadership of it, though.
Yeah, that's going to be in any organization, Jim.
Yeah, it's just it completely any validity to their message was just wiped out by that.
I think we can say the same thing about the NRA. I think we'd say the same thing about the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. I think we can say that about a lot of things, right? People will be people and manipulate. I think the message that they resonated through those years was super important. And I can tell you that it made me more conscious, Jim. It made me more conscious.
But the problem with that movement was they only focused on one thing only, ever. Well, they never did any preemptive actions. They never tried to do anything to prevent stuff from happening. All they did was they would literally riot after a bad event happened. I mean, you never saw them going into neighborhoods with at-risk children, getting them involved, doing this, doing that. You only saw their reactions, their violent reactions most of the time after something happened. It was usually, something bad. And
yeah.
You'd sway me more if you did stuff to prevent that kind of thing instead of just reacting to it.
Well, I think the message, Jim, number one, was that they wanted it was against the police, right? And the way the Black community was treated differently when being approached by police. And I'm not saying all police are bad, but there's a general stigmatism out there, and they brought attention to the issue, right? They had to bring attention to the issue because, right? I thought it was a valid point.
Not saying it isn't. They were just missing half of the effort.
Well, I think it starts there. When there's an issue, I think it starts with bringing attention to the issue. And I think today that organization does a lot of the preemptive stuff that you talk about. I know there's some issues with some of the people in leadership positions, but at the end of the day, I think that organization does a lot of good to educate the community and help them deal with those issues, right? Which I think is super important. I think it's super important.
Well, then it's a darn shame that they're not showing us that.
Well, I think there's a lot we all could do, and this comes, it's funny. It comes back to the initial conversation I had about the Jewish community and what's going on the campuses, right? It's
Mhm.
about treating people with respect, right? Regardless of your religion, regardless of your skin color, regardless of, right, your upbringing or the money you have, right? It's
Mhm.
just treating people with the respect, right? The respect that they deserve, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So
We agree on
awesome.
that.
All righty. Let's move on to the last part number 5, which is freedom to petition, right? This is all about if you don't agree with something the government's doing, you have a right to petition the government to change it, right?
Mhm.
And we've done that. There's been other amendments. Look at, I didn't even spell freedom right. There have been other
I wasn't
amendments
gonna say.
out there that have come to fruition based on freedom of petition. Prime example, right? Women being able to vote, right? That didn't come till what, the 70s?
Yeah, that was what, the 19th Amendment?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
So super important, the ability for the common people in this country to have a right to bring grievances to the government and have the government address it. Super
mhm.
important. This country is a much different country than it was 250 years ago, and it'll probably be a much different country 250 years from now than what we know today. And the ability to be able to change and add amendments to the Constitution based on that, I think are super important.
Right. And even the way you petition anymore changed. I mean, you've got change.org, you've got online social media ways to reach, because if normally if you were gonna, 250 years ago, if you were going to, even in the 70s, if you're going to get a petition together, you're beating the street. You're knocking on people's doors. You may be able to use the US Postal Service. Now, you've got 8 billion people, most of them with internet access. 330 million people in America. Let's just use that one because we're talking about American things. And you can get millions of signatures instead of thousands, if your issue is prominent enough. So even the way, we do this anymore has changed.
It has. What's interesting is I know when people run here, I can speak about in Virginia when they're running for a local county seat, they have to get 250 signatures within the old handwritten signatures, right, on a piece of paper to get on the ballot, right, within the precinct that they're running for, whether it's school board or board of supervisors. And then if you're running for a statewide election, right, it's not regional like, state senators or governor or lieutenant governor, right, you have to get so many signatures from every area, right, on a piece of paper. And so it's quite interesting. But when it comes to right, petitioning the government to change something, you're right. Social media has definitely provided an opportunity to do that. I can talk about one going on in Stafford County. I From what I understand, I've never been to one. Everybody loves Buc-ee's, right? The Buc-ee's gas stations. Well, I got news for you. Buc-ee's is petitioning to build one less than 2 miles from my home,
Oh my God.
on top of 2 uh, residential communities. It's right off the interstate, convenient for Buc-ee's because they're going to build this 120. They want to build this 120 pump gas station. Well, I can tell you, there's a lot of people in my community and the neighboring community that are up in arms about this, right?
Mhm.
And we are absolutely petitioning to prevent Buc-ee's. We're not against Buc-ee's. We're just against it being in a residential area, right?
Gotcha.
So they're building it right off the highway, and it's convenient to build it right off the highway where they're building it. But our take is go build it 4 miles down the road where it's more commercial, right? And it's not residential. There's 2 large residential communities where I live, and so we are petitioning the county to not approve the rezoning for Buc-ee's to come here. Now, I don't know if we're going to be successful or not, but I'm glad that I have the right to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm glad I'm involved in something like that.
Yeah, we have in my house, it's pretty far off the main road, but right at the main road coming out of our subdivision, they got all these houses and subdivisions going up, and we've got no light to go out onto the main road. Wrecks all the time. So we had to petition a couple different times, to get a traffic light put up at that intersection. And it took a few years to do it, but we just got it in last year. So we're like, yay, now we can come in it, because if you're making a left turn out of our subdivision, forget it. But we petitioned, we got that light in. It was causing issues. It was causing wrecks, so yeah.
Super important. Super important to be able to do that. And I'm thankful for us having that ability. Well, Jim, I think we've ran through the gamut. Any other closing comments before we reveal our podcast for 2 weeks from now?
Well, I just have to say that, you hear people complaining about living in America all the time, and you hear people complaining about how we're not the greatest country in the world. There are plenty of countries that don't have this kind of rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. A lot of countries in certain areas, you have a religion or you're just not going to live. We have these freedoms here for a reason. And our founding fathers put these in for a reason. We may have trouble getting them, through sometimes. We may have trouble with their conflicts sometimes, but we live in a country that has them. And I think we just take that for granted. Too many people take it for granted.
Absolutely. Jim, I'm just going to bring it up. We talked about it on the phone, right? It was interesting. So I know a lot of people, we talk about Doge and all the things Doge are doing, and there's people that are usually on one side of the coin on this or the other. But Defense Secretary Hegseth announced that there was so what I've learned is that there's a lot of shock and awe with Dodge going on out there, Jim. And the announcement that they were going to cancel a $500 million contract at DARPA, a help desk contract. If you go look at Secretary Hegseth's video, his most recent video about savings, you can hear that on there. Well, the contract is $500 million, but it's not just help desk. It's all the enterprise IT services for the Pentagon. It's a contract I'm on. I'm good. I'm all for saving money. I just want the message to be clear and be right. It comes back to that freedom of speech, freedom of the press. So I just believe it's being slanted, for convenience of shock and awe. And I'm not down with that. So if they eliminate the contract, they eliminate the contract. I'll get over it. I'll move on. I'll be fine. But I just want the truth. The question is, did Secretary Hegseth get the truth when it was presented to him, or did he change it? I don't know. But nonetheless, that's important to me, that the information that the government provides has to be fair and accurate. It goes back to what we've been talking about last 50 so minutes. So, well, next week, or not next week, 2 weeks from today, we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment. So I hope people will tune in on, what are we looking at? The 27th, April 27th. Or what's up?
Well, we may need to change that, Kevin. I'm out of town. I forgot all about that.
You're just going to have to dial in remotely. No, I'm just joking with you, Jim. Well, we'll look at changing it. But our next topic, when we have the next podcast, is going to be on the Second Amendment. We think it's super important to talk about the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of things going on with that. I think I have some common sense perspectives on how to move forward with the common sense with the Second Amendment. So I'm excited. So Jim and I will talk, and we'll let you know when we're going to do our next podcast on the Second Amendment.
All right.
Well, with that, I'm Kevin.
I'm Jim.
And we are
the Signal Brothers.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Good night. Thank you for joining.